Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be back again on the X podcast with everyone. My name is Brenda Rigney. I'm a dream business coach, and I work with midlife women entrepreneurs. Today, we have on Ellyn Schinke. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did. Very good.
Okay, awesome. Okay, good stuff. Otherwise known as Coach Ellyn. You can find her on Instagram as Coach Ellyn. Ellyn is here today. She is a former research scientist in biology, microbiology, but now turned business, stress management coach, and specifically in
Mhm,
the area of burnout.
mhm,
And you work with a lot of women entrepreneurs. So this is where the synergy, our conversation today is going to take place. We want to talk about women, business, burnout,
mhm.
all the things. Welcome, Ellyn.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
It's great to have you on. Tell us anything else that we need to know about you that I just didn't mention in the intro.
Oh gosh, I would say the other important thing to know about me, because this plays so much into my business and so much into what I've learned about my business, is I ultimately left science, yes, because of burnout, but also I left science because of the fact that I was a very externally validated human. I kind of did all of the things in my life because
Mhm.
other people would tell me, oh, give me the gold star, tell me I'm doing a good job. I
Right.
always looked for that. And then, I hit a point where that validation just wasn't enough anymore. And I think that was a big reason why I burned out, is because I was validation seeking and people pleasing and perfection chasing, as opposed to actually trying to figure out who I was and what I wanted in my
Yeah.
life. So that's a big reason why I came to do this work.
Yeah, and I think it's like well, number one, it's a great reason in the sense of like, sorry you had
Hmm.
to go through that, but also it's a great reason to sort of even acknowledge today because I think so much of our schooling and early days in our career are all about that, right? The external
Yes.
validation, organizations are set up for that. Carrot
Yes.
stick, performance reviews, incentives, bonus programs. We saw that in school as we're going through like formative training, and then obviously into specialized education like you would have done with sciences. And that's good, I think, in the beginning when you're starting off,
Hmm.
because you kind of need that guidance and, the guardrails and the bumpers along
Hmm.
the way to kind of keep you going, keep you motivated. But
Hmm.
somewhere in there, someone needs to talk to us about like, yeah, you can redefine things for yourself and you can
Yes.
take charge of your life, your career. So I love that
Yes.
you had to do it, but it's, I think what ends up happening is that people don't know that they can create that for themselves. And then
Yeah.
the result is burnout or maybe imposter syndrome, some type of fatigue, right? Like it's just like
Exactly. Like the
over analyzing.
emotional fatigue, for
Yeah.
sure, that I think is an underappreciated part of burnout. I think a lot of times when people think of burnout, they think of exhaustion and overwhelm, which those are absolutely parts of the experience of burnout. But I think the
Right.
emotional exhaustion of burnout is the thing that really can be very pervasive, that sometimes people don't know what to do about, and they don't even know what to look for per se with that emotional exhaustion side.
So can we go through that a little bit? Like what are
Yeah.
some of those early detectors? Because I think it's easy, like, well, I don't want to say it's easy for anybody, but it's like we know when we're burned out. Like my
Hmm.
burnout is like, lying on the couch, like people ask me a question, like I can't form sentences. Like I'm just
Yep.
like, there's the fridge, figure it out, you're on your own.
Yep.
Or like I go sometimes reclusive where I'm like, I just need to go away for like a couple of days and like you guys
Yeah.
need to like solve all the world issues without me. But before we get to that, like sort of really down in the dumps phase of burnout,
Mhm.
what are some of those early detections that we should be thinking of or recognizing?
Yeah, and you've actually hit some of the signs that I tell people to look for. So I always qualify this by saying I break burnout down into types, because yes, burnout is one thing, but the ways in which it can show up can be very different from person to person and depending upon the season of their life that they're in.
Mhm.
So when it comes to the four types are physical, overwhelm, emotional, and boredom burnout. You can actually experience burnout from boredom related things. So
Right.
from the physical side, the early signs to look for are things like changes in your basic self-care patterns. So like when I say that, what I'm talking about is stuff like your energy levels are changing over the course of the day, your sleep patterns are changing, or actually a really common one, which is actually very celebrated culturally, is when you're not getting hungry. So like if you're not getting hungry until well after lunch, that's actually a
Mhm.
really big sign of high cortisol. So that's one of the ones that I
Okay.
tell
Yeah.
people to look for, is those kind of self-care based signs for the physical side. And it can also be getting sick more frequently, because when our immune system and our stress response are very interconnected. Fun fact, my background is actually in microbiology and immunology, so the study of your immune system.
Okay. So
But
we're
like
related.
they're
Yeah.
very, yeah, they're very interconnected. So one of the things I see a lot with people is they're just getting sick back to back to back over the course of fall. So like instead of getting once or sick once in the fall, they're getting sick like 3 or 4 times. So that's
Yeah.
another thing that we can really look for. The overwhelm side of burnout, the thing I always tell people to look for with the overwhelm side of burnout, especially as an entry point, is what I call absolute language, which is essentially just very defeatist language. So you're using words like always, like this always happens to me. I'm never going to get through this. Like every client's the same, like this just kind of very negative, defeated language that
Right.
really is kind of a gateway into some of the deeper signs of overwhelm. And then from an emotional lens, what I really tell people to look for emotionally is emotional reactivity. So being
Mm.
quick to anger, quick to
Yeah.
tears. Those are signs that you're veering into emotional burnout. And if we can catch that early, especially if we realize, oh my God, this is not like me, then we can start to make lifestyle changes.
Okay. All right. So you work with women entrepreneurs, business
Mhm.
owners, women in leadership type positions. What are some of the things that we need to be cognizant of? Like, I mean, there's obviously women in their 20s, their 30s, 40s. We're starting to get into vast hormonal changes, those type of things. You talked about it, even like cortisol levels. What are some
Mhm.
things that maybe give specific advice or coaching around?
Oh, okay. I'm trying to figure out how I can differentiate this from my framework, but we might ultimately start veering into the framework a little bit and
Okay.
talking about this
We
because
can we can go into the framework, like whatever. That's a
yeah.
cue up for it.
So my sustainable success framework, because I feel like with business, it should all be about sustainability. I
Mhm.
personally hate the phrase work-life balance. I hate it even more when people try to say it's work-life harmony because that just feels like semantics and trying to like wrap different language
I knew
around
we
the
had to
same
talk together.
problem.
I knew we had to talk together. I can't stand it either. I'm always like, there's one life, just one life, one Brenda.
Yes.
I don't need like 5 different Brendas. That's like too much to manage.
Exactly. So, what I always tell people to focus on more so than balance is
Mhm.
we need to create sustainability. And we need to create sustainability in your systems, in your self care, in your mindset. So it's all about that's how we create success that we can actually manage. I am not for this whole, which a lot of entrepreneurs do. I'm going to trade my 9 to 5 for 24/7. Like, I
Mhm.
get it. We love our work. We love the freedom it creates. We love the lifestyle it creates. But we didn't start this to work 24/7.
Right.
We ultimately, for a lot of us, we started this for freedom. And I want to help us work less and live more. So, one of the big things that I will teach people let's start with the self care side, because I think the self care side is something that a lot of people are initially looking for when they're looking at recovering from burnout. And one of
Mhm.
the biggest shifts that I like to encourage people to make, which can be hard for some, easier for others, it kind of depends on the person, is I want to redefine what self care actually looks like. Because for most of us, we massively overcomplicate our self care. We
Right.
have like a 2-hour morning routine with like 24 steps.
Right.
And I
24
get
products.
the Exactly. I get the aspiration of that, and that TikTok and Instagram can make that look like really beautiful and really like inspiring. But the
Mhm.
fact of the matter is that's not sustainable for most of us. We've got to stop creating routines, especially self-care routines, for our ideal day and start creating routines for our normal day,
Thank you.
because your normal day is not going to be able to accommodate this like laundry list of self-care things that you feel like you quote unquote have to do. So
Right.
that's a big shift that I encourage people to make. And one of the ways I do that is I will ask them to redefine what counts as movement. So,
Mhm.
like for a lot of us, we will say, oh, well, it doesn't count. And I used to be this way. I used to think self care didn't count unless I was going to a gym and working out for 45 plus minutes.
Right.
And then as I was experiencing burnout and as I was recovering from burnout, I started to realize that that didn't actually feel good and didn't actually feel like it was benefiting my body. So I just started walking. I just started going on long walks in the
Mhm.
morning, in the afternoon. And that actually was a tremendous recovery tool because it wasn't punishing my body. And I started to realize that the things that I used to count as quote unquote self care or quote unquote exercise were in a lot of ways actually hurting me. So as soon as I redefined what counted as self-care, that made a massive difference in my life. So I realize now that walks count, like stretching count. I basically say
Yeah.
anything that's movement counts, even if it's 15 minutes around the block or a 45-minute loop that I do. It doesn't matter. Movement is movement. And that's going to benefit me no matter what it looks like. So that's a big way that I will help women to get back on track is by helping them redefine and create more sustainable self-care patterns. But the other thing I really like to help women do, especially entrepreneurs, because I know that this is like scary for entrepreneurs, I love to help them with systems.
Okay.
I am apparently infinitely more tech savvy than I've ever given myself credit for. And I am a productivity nerd. Like, I love this stuff. And I feel like so many burnout coaches, they'll talk about, oh, you need better ways to organize yourself. You need better ways to manage your time, but then they don't give you any tools for how to do it.
Okay.
So I
Cool.
think a lot of us do a couple things wrong. We either are trying to remember way too much stuff,
Mhm.
or we're keeping information in vastly too many different places, which what that does to us is it mentally spreads us then. So I will, with a lot of my clients, whether it is some fancy productivity app or Evernote or a notepad, I just start to train them to consolidate where they're keeping information. And probably this is the most important part, actually writing down all of the things that they're trying to force their brain to remember. Our brains are terrible filing cabinets. Education did us dirty. Like,
Yeah.
we need to start writing stuff down, capturing those important things we need to remember instead of
Mhm.
forcing our brain to remember them. So like those two shifts right there, I will inevitably talk about with every single client I work with. And they can make a massive difference in terms of getting our energy back, decreasing our overwhelm, freeing up our brain and our mental and emotional capacity. It does so much for us.
Yeah, I was actually talking to another coach, and I think this sort of plays off into the same conversation about we have all these tools from education or from our
Mhm.
corporate days around how to like file things and keep things organized. And if you were working on a project team inside an organization, you couldn't have like post-it notes all over the place. You'd have to have it in some type of
Yeah.
project management software and keep it organized. Yet in our home life, we don't
Yes.
we don't do that. And for some reason, we don't take that same training or those same tools and put it into our home life. Or even as entrepreneurs, we're like, oh, we're a solopreneur, and that's only like relevant for like big corporate teams. I'm like, no, 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 no. You need a
Mhm.
project management software to interact with your clients. You need, whatever it is, right? So we're going to talk about today. You use Notion, but
Yes,
whether
I'm a
it's
Notion
Trello
nerd.
or Asana or something where you can keep track of things and keep
Mhm.
track of the conversations you've had with your clients. So we learn all these things in school or in our corporate jobs, but we don't take it into our solopreneur business or into our home life, even with our partners, right? Or our kids. I see all these like, great mom entrepreneurs and they're like managing soccer schedules and like what their partner's doing and then their business all on like notepads, like the one I've got in front of me here. And I'm like, you have like an organizational system here. Like you are running a corporation, like it's your home,
Mhm.
but you got to get organized around it.
100%. I'm so glad you brought that up. Like the systems, like when I use Notion and all of the like the templates that I sell and the systems that I help people build, there is inevitably a chunk of it that is personal. Like when I tell you my life is in Notion, my life is in Notion. I have literally outfits in Notion with the articles of clothing that I already own and the ones that I want to buy in
Yeah.
Notion. When I moved into the apartment I currently live in, I did my entire apartment hunt in Notion so I could keep track of which ones I had appointments scheduled for, which ones I had already
Right.
viewed, which ones I decided I didn't like. Like
Yeah.
the amount of personal things I have inside of my systems is unreal. And I used to share, I need to get back to this. I used to share them all on YouTube and people would be like, "Oh my God, do you have a template for this?" And I'm like, "No, but I should."
No,
Like
but I
it's
think it's
amazing.
yeah, or planning your vacation or whatever. And it's like, I think,
Yes.
a lot of the times where these, okay, so we've got like, we know what the extreme looks like when we've gone into burnout. Like I
Mhm.
said, me on the couch, like, don't talk to me. But there's all the steps that sort of lead up to it, right? And
Mhm.
then there's the, breakdown in communication in our relationships, either
Yep,
work or friendship, etc. So this is this whole work-life balance thing. It's like,
it
oh, I got to
is.
compartmentalize everything. It's like, no, 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 no.
No.
Go back to some systems. I even
Mhm.
throw in there like values. Like, what do you value? Like, once we get
Oh,
clear on our
yes.
values,
100%. That to me is part of creating a sustainable mindset is
yeah.
knowing your values. Like I do values work with almost all of my clients as well.
Yeah, because
100%.
if like you don't understand what you value, or you've got someone else's values, like maybe your parents' values from like when you were still at home at like 4 years
Mhm.
old, to now you're 28 or 38, you got to have your own set
Mhm.
of values because that helps you make
Yep.
decisions on where you're spending your time, who you're spending your time with. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I think we're totally
I
on
would
the same page.
encourage everybody who's listening, think about how you actually define success. Like not Webster
Mhm.
Dictionary's definition of success or your parents' definition of success, what actually feels like success to you, that's going to be a very revealing question for figuring out like what you're really working toward in your career, in your business, in your life. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that also helps you as a business owner. I think like if you're thinking about working with a mentor or a coach, because
Mhm.
they may have different values, different ways of like defining what success is. And if that's not aligned to yours, then it's not going to necessarily be like the most helpful for you in whatever stage of
Mhm.
business you're at. So let's talk about Notion for a bit. Tell us about Notion,
Yeah.
why you're passionate about it, why this is going to help my life.
Oh my gosh, where to start? I feel like when I discovered Notion, and this really comes back to the framework I talk about. I feel like part of our issue with our systems is that we are, for a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of people in general, we are like spread over the internet. We have like this
Mhm.
tool we use for this. We have this tool we use for that. You have this, budgeting tool. You have this tool. You're using Pinterest to keep track of your outfit ideas. Like all of these different places on the internet that store important information. And when I found Notion, I very quickly realized that that could be a solution where I could consolidate everything.
Okay.
I could put budgets in there. I could put everything for my business in there, my CRM, my sales tracker, my client hubs, my products and my product suites, all of the ideas for projects that I'm working on, all of the certifications that I'm working on. I realized that this tool could become the central location for literally everything I was trying to keep track of. And what I loved about it when I first started using it is initially it's free. And
Hmm.
I used it for like 2 years before I actually started paying for it, and even the paid version is like $50 a year. So
Okay.
I was able to consolidate all of these systems down to one platform that's very inexpensive, but the best part of it to me is a lot of the tools I was using, like the Trellos and the ClickUps and all the other ones, Evernote, I didn't feel like they worked the way my brain worked. I didn't feel like I could organize information the way I wanted to organize information or visualize information the way I wanted to visualize information. And in Notion, I always say that the blessing of Notion is the curse of Notion too, because it's part of what makes adoption of Notion a little tricky. Notion's a blank slate.
Hmm.
You can build it however you want to build it. You can include whatever you want to include. You can format it however you want to format it. You can make your perfect system inside of Notion. That is exactly how your brain works. A lot of people who have ADHD, I found, like Notion because of that, because they can make it work the way they want it to work. But that's also the challenge of Notion is there's a learning curve and you are literally starting with a blank slate. So you have to build and create everything. But that's where people like me come in and YouTubers that you follow can come in because you can get templates from them. You can get these really, really wonderful starting points. And that's become another factor of Notion that I really love is the community around Notion is
Hmm.
unreal. Some people call us a cult, which is perhaps not inaccurate, but there are a lot of us out there that just love Notion and just want to share, hey, this is what I've done and this is how it could potentially support you. And honestly, that's invaluable with a tool like this because you want to see what other people have done and you want to be able to learn from them. And
Yeah.
so it's not just the like, I can complete customizability of it. It's like virtual scrapbooking to me. I love it. Like it's the complete customizability, but it's also the support networks that are
Hmm.
built in with your fellow Notion nerds that are out there. And I really, really love that too.
So I think that's like that is kind of the recipe of like if there's this fear that you're heading towards burnout,
Mm-hmm.
it might actually be true. You might be because if you
Mm-hmm.
don't have like a system or a framework or
Mm-hmm.
values like we've talked about so far on our call today, then yeah, you might be like a feather floating in the wind, and
Yeah.
and just kind of like bumping up against things and burning out as a result because it's just
Mm-hmm.
exhausting trying to like figure out everything like you're going through like starting from scratch every time versus what
Mm-hmm.
you're saying to me is like okay if you have a framework where it's like okay here's what my self-care looks like needs to look like and it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have to be the 27 products
Yeah. It can be
um
like these bare minimums. Yeah.
bare minimum things but you get into that cycle where it's like yeah I know that like I need to get sleep at this time or this
Mm-hmm.
is what my wake up routine should look like or movement
Mm-hmm.
then you get into these practices right and then
Yeah.
that reduces this sort of like um what's the word I'm looking for just like abstract way of living like if it's too
Mm-hmm.
abstract our brain is spending all this time trying to figure out how to get out
Mm-hmm.
of this problem and that also creates exhaustion too right and we were talking about that
Yeah.
mental exhaustion so by having some of these systems in place it can definitely pare things back for us I think the other thing too as we
Exactly.
get closer into that sort of midlife there's things that are coming up that are just undefined. Like,
Yes.
like I'm a recent empty nester. My kids are leaving the nest, literally, like one's in Switzerland, one's in Montreal. I'm on the other side of Canada. And there's stuff that comes up that there's like no rule books on. Like they asked
Yeah.
me, like my daughter texted me something last night. I'm not going to tell you what it is. She doesn't want me to reveal what's going on in her life on my podcast. But it's, it's like, oh, okay, I have to think through how I would help her out in this situation.
Mhm.
It's not the common thing is of like, mom, I need to learn how to tie my shoelaces, or like it's getting
Yeah.
more complex because they're adults now.
Yeah.
And, or
Honestly, anything after college there's no playbook for. Like, I feel
yeah,
like that's why so many of us flail in our late 20s, in our 30s, maybe even into our 40s and beyond, is because there's no rule book and there's no playbook for after college. You have completed all the steps, even if you've gone to grad school. Sorry about that. I had a tickle.
no worries. No worries.
There's no playbook. And that's where so many of us start to veer off track and feel aimless and feel lost because
Mhm.
nobody's telling us what we should be doing. No one's telling us how we should be living. No one's telling us how to parent. No one's telling us how to maintain these relationships that might be now like cross country from each
Right.
other. It's hard. And so
Mhm.
that little bit of structure can go a long way. I always say that there's two fundamental things that we need when it comes to bouncing back from burnout and becoming burnout proof is what I like to say. Two
Mhm.
fundamental mindsets that we need to have. You need to have a ruthless amount of self-awareness and you need to have some damn compassion for yourself.
Okay. Yeah.
Like those two things can go so far. Like with these scenarios you're talking about of like there's no roadmap. There's no right answer for how to do this. That's where the ruthless self-awareness comes in. Getting very, very clear with yourself on what's working and what's not working, what feels good to me right now and what really doesn't. And then the compassion piece of every time we hold ourselves to absurdly unrealistic standards, or every time
Mhm.
we judge ourselves for our quote unquote inability to do something or our weakness or our not enoughness, that compassion can have us step back and be like, it's okay. You really are doing the best you can. And there's so many other people out there who are right there in this with you. And there's like a lot of beauty in that. So like those mindsets, like we talk values, but honestly, if you can have some ruthless self-compassion and some ruthless self-awareness,
Mhm.
you probably never thought you'd hear ruthless used in that way, but we're
No,
doing
but
it.
yeah, no, it's true because I think, well, once you have those two things in place, it probably then opens up the door to possibility, to learning, to,
Mm-hmm.
openness to create things that are different, that
Mm-hmm.
can be more supportive for you. But I think what ends up
Mm-hmm.
happening is if we don't get ruthless about the compassion and the
Mm-hmm.
self-awareness, we can go out there and learn something, but then we're like hard on ourselves for not making it work the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We take the course, we download the workbook, we sign up for the coach or whatever, and it's like it's not working. And then
Mm-hmm.
we're even harder on ourselves. So we
Mm-hmm.
need to bring in the compassion and the self-awareness to be able to say, yeah, you know what, I have limitations today. You know what, I
Mm-hmm.
can only make it till 2 o'clock. And that's going to
Mm-hmm.
be good enough today. And I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
Versus like, no, I've got to like pound this out until 9 o'clock or midnight to make it work.
Yeah.
And
I want
again,
to
I think
touch
as we
on
get, yeah.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say,
No,
I
I was
want to
just,
touch on
yeah, go ahead.
how that relates to like the entrepreneurial journey too. That
Yeah, please.
self-compassion and that self-awareness, especially for this is probably the biggest lesson I learned as an entrepreneur. For anybody who's coming from an inherently respected former career path.
Hmm.
Like I was getting my PhD. I was going to be Dr. Ellyn. I was going to be doing research. Like I remember the way people used to react when I told them that I was in graduate school and what I was in graduate school for. Leaving that, like I dropped out of my PhD. My parents loved it. It was great. I dropped out of my PhD and I decided I was going to start a business as a coach. And this was like 10 years ago. And let's be
Hmm.
honest, coaching was not respected 10 years ago. And it's only just starting to become more and more and more respected and understood and embraced as a career path. There was a massive identity shift that I had to go through with that. And it was hard. I don't sugarcoat it to anytime I talk about this, I don't sugarcoat it. It was very hard. I struggled. When I dropped out of grad school, my dad told me he was disappointed and I lost one of my really good friends because he just couldn't respect the decision that I was making.
Yeah,
So
that's
I
rough.
questioned myself and I questioned, am I making the right choice? Like it feels right. It feels like where I should be, but like how do I do this? There was so much uncertainty and so much questioning myself. So I literally had to give myself radical amounts of compassion and just be really self-aware and non-judgmental of the fact that I need to tiptoe into this. I'm not going to be able to just tomorrow start this business and be like, hey, I'm a coach and be super confident in it. I'm
Right.
not. So I had to give myself permission to tiptoe into it, to tiptoe into the identity. And quite literally, I would start introducing myself as, yeah, because I was doing contract editing at the time. I'm a science editor and I'm starting a coaching business. So it was kind of like my dash in my name.
Mhm.
So then it became, well, I'm a coach and I also do contract editing on the side. And I just tiptoed into this identity shift because I knew that's what I needed to be able to step into it. And I
Yeah.
think that's something that if I judged myself for that, I don't even know that I would be here now doing this work. I just had to let myself listen to myself and let myself take the time I needed to step into this identity shift so that I could develop the confidence that I could actually do this.
I love that you shared that as a learning because I think it's really important. I've shifted my business in the last 6 years
Mhm.
4 times,
Mhm.
and with that too, with every shift, it requires like different ways of messaging, attracting people into your orbit. And I do have still people in my community. They'll be like, "What are you doing now?" And that used to sometimes bother me. I'd be like, "Why don't you know every 5 minutes what I'm doing in my life and in my business?" But now it's just like it's just another opportunity to have a conversation and again have
Mhm.
compassion for them, have compassion for myself. This sort of quick to, I think you talked about it again, those triggers that represent burnout, right? That emotional trigger that comes up really
Mhm.
quickly, like why don't people know me, respect me, etc.
Mhm.
Whoa, just a second. Everyone's just
Mhm.
doing what they need to do to kind of get through the day.
Mhm.
And you, Brenda, are not always going to be top of mind for everybody and what you're up to. And that's okay. Um, I love that. I love that that's a learning for you. Any advice that you would give to an entrepreneur that starting their business right now and they're worried about the burnout, especially if they're coming from a corporate career that, let's face it, especially women in the last few years going
Mhm.
through the pandemic, we saw a huge exodus of women in corporate jobs wanting to start up their own business. But
Mhm.
there's this fear of like, oh, I'm going to take that burnout behavior that I had maybe in my corporate job and bring that into my business. Any advice that you would give them?
Oh, I'm trying to keep it short and sweet because I have so much advice that I would give them. But I would say the first thing that I think is going to protect you emotionally and mentally is know whose opinion matters in your business. I think that's one of the reasons I kind of struggled my first couple of years as an entrepreneur is I was listening too much to other people. I think it's great to have mentors and to have
Mhm.
support around you, but when you put your mentor's opinion above your own, that can be really challenging to navigate. And that can ultimately lead you to building a business that you don't actually like. It might even be a successful business, but if you get several years down the road and you
Yeah.
realize this has been successful, but I don't actually like the business I built, that's a
Mhm.
problem. So that's the first thing that I would say is make sure you know whose opinion matters and it's yours. Yours is the
Mhm.
opinion that matters. The
Yeah.
second thing I would encourage people to think about is that I understand shiny object syndrome. I have 80 bajillion things I always want to be working on and launching and doing and ways I want to
Mhm.
be supporting people in my business. But I think the thing I would add is you have time. You
Yeah.
have time to make it work. You have time to do all the things. I actually remember when I left grad school and I was like a year or two into business and I was frustrated because nothing was working because I wasn't listening to myself. I was listening to other people.
Mhm.
I remember, and I had all these ideas and all these things I wanted to do. I finally made a deal with myself and I was like, look, Ellyn, if you can put 10 years into a career path that you didn't actually want for the right reasons, science, you can put 10 years into this. Give yourself 10 years. Give yourself 10 years to figure it out. Be patient, see what works and what doesn't, but give yourself 10 years. And honestly, I could give myself 20 years because I should be able to give myself more time than I spent in the
Right.
career I didn't like. But I think that's what I mean by be patient. You have time. You have time to do all of the things. You have
Mhm.
time to make it click and make it work. No, not everybody goes full time in their business every year. So if you don't, or in a year, if you don't, that's okay. Give yourself time to figure it out. Don't beat yourself up and shame yourself and feel like you're not a good entrepreneur if it's not working in the first year or the first 2 years. It took me 5 years to take my business full time. And part of that was income insecurity. I'm single. So I wanted to have more of an income cushion underneath myself.
Mhm.
But part of it was confidence. I'll be completely honest in saying that. So you have time. You have time to figure things out. You have time to do all the things. Just be patient with yourself and use that. If you want to steal my language, go for it. If you gave however many years to your previous career that you didn't actually want, you can at least give yourself that much time to figure out your business.
Yeah, I love that. You've given us a gift. It's going to show up in the show notes. Can you talk a little bit more about it? We mentioned it before, but now you're going to give us
Yes.
a gift around it.
I am going to give you a gift because I personally think that one of the biggest things a lot of entrepreneurs need, but they maybe aren't spending a lot of time on, is their systems. And so what I'm going to gift you guys is a Notion template. It is, I used to give such a bare bones Notion template. This is a really good Notion template.
All
Like,
right.
I'm really excited about it. So if you want to start using Notion, but you don't want to start with a blank slate, you want to have something pre-built so that you can experiment and figure out if this is the right platform for you, go ahead and head to the show notes because I've got a Notion template for you down there. You just pop in your email and you get access to that Notion template. It's got all of my systems, all of my self-care routines. It's got habit tracking and project management. It's got all the things in it. And I'm really excited for you guys to check it out.
Awesome. I can't wait to share it with everybody when we share the podcast. One last question for you, Ellyn. If I was to give you a billboard and you could put anything on it, what would it say and where would you put it?
Oh, just one billboard. My brain immediately goes to "You Are Enough." I actually got I am enough tattooed on my forearm for my 35th birthday because that's, I think, one of the big reasons why I was always validation seeking is because I didn't think I was enough. And so honestly, I'd put "You Are Enough" on a big billboard and plop it in the middle of, I don't know, New York City or LA or something like that. Honestly, my ideal version would be put a "You Are Enough" billboard on every college campus in the United States.
Nice.
That would probably be my ideal.
Yeah. Start them off in the right direction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Thanks so much, Ellyn, for being in here today, sharing your wisdom with us around burnout, your framework, and the gift that I can't wait to also explore myself.
Yes. You're very welcome. Thank you for having me. This was awesome.
And everyone else tuning in today, thanks so much for being here and being a part of the X podcast. Take care, everyone.